Hello, and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I'm your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, and joining me today is none other than John Brookfield. And you might think, oh, I've never heard that name before, but I guarantee you have felt his presence in the fitness industry because he is the creator of Battling Ropes. He is the author of a number of books, several of which I have owned for many years, which we'll talk about momentarily. And all around very influential guy, very smart, extremely strong. And we are going to be talking in depth today about his approach to fitness and strength. And I really think that you're going to get quite a bit out of it because I've gotten tons out of what he has offered over the years. So now, before we begin, I always like to tell people, and this is the first time you're hearing this. You might enjoy this. I've got a free ebook called the 9-Minute Kettlebell and Bodyweight Challenge. It is all about how to use the Gait pattern movements, which I know John is also a very big fan of, for getting stronger, fitter, more resilient. And as the name implies, it's only 9 minutes a day, so you can toss it into your current workouts. It's designed to complement your training rather than complicate it. And best of all, the movements are very simple to learn. You can learn them in a matter of a few minutes in most cases. So check out 9minutechallenge.com. That is the number 9minutechallenge.com, and download your own free copy. I think you will enjoy it greatly. So without further ado, John, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Alex. I appreciate it.
I was just thinking, I was flipping through a couple of your books just the other day in preparation for our call. And I remember this is probably like 10 years ago. I bought Mastery of Hand Strength and the Grip Master's Manual. And I remember like so many of the things that I've done for my own grip strength over the years have been directly related to what I have learned from you. And while a lot of stuff in the book seems like, like nowadays it seems almost commonplace because so many people are training like this. When you were doing it, it was somewhat like revolutionary. So I'm curious, how did you even get into this approach to strength training, to fitness, all that other sort of a thing? Like, what's your origin story, let's say?
Well, long story short, my father, I was originally from Greenfield, Indiana, and my father was an old-time professional basketball player in the NBA. He played about 11 or 12 years, actually, professional basketball, and then he was a high school coach in a small town in Indiana. And I was pretty naturally athletic, but I wasn't really strong, and my hands were kind of small and frail. And long story short, there was a guy. He was like, I think he was either 82 or 84 years old, at this old lumber yard there on the outside of Greenfield, Indiana. And at, 82, 84, he was bending 60 penny nails and slamming nails through wood. He'd work out there in the lumber yard and just kind of that made quite an impression on me, of course. So I started kind of. This is pretty cool. I'm going to get some 60 penny nails and bend them like this guy did. Well, it didn't quite go the same way. Okay. I had the nails, I just didn't quite bend them. So kind of that whole grip strength bug kind of started there. And naturally athletic, but said I had developed the goal to kind of develop the world's strongest hands. So right from there, I was kind of seeking the Lord, and I started doing all kinds of bending and just kind of, you couldn't find much on grip strength back then. Squeeze a little hand grip or Iron Mind, or not Iron Mind, but Iron Master, I think it was, those big green ones. A little bit of wrist curl stuff. So I just started kind of messing around on my own. Just all kinds of natural things, and that's kind of how the book got going. Grip strength is very, very unique too, because you think about steel bending or anything, you cannot use all. Let's say you're bending a horseshoe, just for example, or really anything, you can't use all your upper body strength, no matter how much you have, if your lower arms are weaker or your hands are weaker. It's just like, it'd be like us trying to put like a piece of steel in an actual vise, right? And the vise isn't sturdy. No matter how hard we push, what's going to happen? It's just going to fall right out of there. So that's kind of how I got going on the grip strength.
Yeah, a lot of people don't think that much about it. I think they feel like, my hands and forearms are going to get enough work if I'm holding on to stuff. And that's certainly going to help to a certain degree, but you do get to a point at which you need to put in a little bit more direct focus. And I think that the peripheral things like, our calves, our grip, things like that can really end up being the weak links that prevent us from getting a lot stronger. But like you pointed out, with the hands in particular, if you can't hold something in place, it doesn't matter how strong your chest is or how strong your back is, you're just not going to be able to exert that force into the object, whether it's bending a horseshoe or anything else. Now, when you started doing this bending type of stuff and you started getting into grip strength in general, were there other people that you were able to connect with in those early days, like prior to the advent of the internet, or materials you were able to get your hands on, or was it really all just
No, no,
experimentation?
nobody really, to be honest with you, Alex. It was just got kind of all me. I would study kind of some of those old time strongmen, I mean, way, way back, but really nobody was doing it, or if they were, I didn't know.
Hmm.
So it was just kind of like going out in the woods and just blazing a whole new trail.
Sure.
And then kind of once I started doing it, maybe talking to a few people and wrote the book, and then everybody started kind of flocking to that principle. But really, it was just pretty much just it was just uncharted water, so to speak. And refer back again, because people don't think about this, but once again, even if you're deadlifting or picking something up, it's like picture of like putting a piece of steel in a vise, and no matter how much force you put on, or hit it with a hammer, if you will, you're not going to be able to do anything with that piece of steel unless that vise is tight. Or it'd be like trying to deadlift. It'd be like trying to wrap a spider web around an 800-pound bar and try to deadlift it.
That's a
You
very
know,
good
and,
analogy.
and they know now that basically, grip strength is huge with longevity.
Mm.
I've really studied. I've seen a lot of studies about that now, though. It goes back to how long someone normally would live is their grip strength.
Yeah, yeah. There's a very strong correlation. I've read read about a few of these studies as well, and it seems like there might be a connection with the fact that the gentleman that you met who could bend the 60 penny nails and drive nails through wood, the fact that he was in his early 80s and he was still able to do these things, there's probably a connection there. He had that kind of grip strength that even at such an advanced age, it was as if like no time had really passed in terms of his physical prowess. Now, how long did you train with this? Do you remember his name? Do you remember
I
much
really
about him?
don't. I honestly don't. I kind of can still kind of picture him, but I don't. And you think about that too. So someone like it keeps people motivated. I mean,
Yeah.
too, obviously, just to have that hobby or something. I'm sure the guy seemed to get so much out of it. I mean, that he could get with kids or anybody and bend those nails, and people were impressed in general, right? But then thinking, here's a guy up in his 80s. I mean, it made it 1,000-fold then.
Yeah, big time. And it's interesting too because when I read through Mastery of Hand Strength, I look at all of the great stuff that you have in there, and most of it is not these like gripper implements or these kind of new aged sort of grip devices. It's really more stuff that people can find. They can buy at a hardware store or they can find around the house. There's a lot of like hammer work, like
Oh yeah,
sledge
yeah,
levering and things like that. And it when you think about it, it makes sense because you think of the people like this gentleman you mentioned from the lumber yard, and or we think about blacksmiths or mechanics, people who have a reputation of having very strong grip. They're actually using their hands in the real world on
yeah.
an everyday basis. And I think that you mentioned your grip strength is so unique because you're right. Like you're not probably going to get a huge bench press just from working, let's say, as a mechanic or as a farmer or as any of these things.
Yeah.
But this kind of real world activity will have a direct carryover into your grip. Now, what are some of the benefits then of having a grip that's super strong if you are interested, let's say, in improving your military press or heavier deadlifts? You had that great example with like the analogy of like the vice, for instance. But what are some other cool things that you found that you're able to do with a much stronger grip?
Well, and thinking back to that gentleman again, he probably didn't even realize it, Alex, but like, there'd be those long planks, long wooden planks, and a lot of what he was doing all day, he would kind of grab those like, like this, like with a pinch grip, right? And kind of pull them.
Hmm.
But you think about something even simple. Let's look like, let's think in baseball or tennis. If you can do like kind of one of those 3D imagings, and if let's say somebody's got a really average grip or weak grip, when they hit the tennis ball or that bat, there's a little bit of like almost like a crackback, if you would, you know what I mean, where the ball hits, there's a
Hmm.
little bit of rebound effect. But if somebody has that real strong grip, it's more their whole body's like one piece,
Mm.
and then they can implement their core as well.
Hmm.
So everything flows together just like one piece. Once again, it'd be like if we're trying to hit something with um, like a strong, like a bat or something, comparison to having a bat hooked to a spider web.
Right.
You've got a very, very strong bat, but part of the impact is with something, very, very weak. And so you just cannot use that force.
On this topic, it's interesting that you're bringing this up because I remember this was all, again, this is something from Mastery of Hand Strength. It was either that or Grip Master's Manual. But you mentioned, with each passing year, it seems like a new record is set in powerlifting or in Olympic lifting or these kind of what we might think of as like traditional weight training, but people's grip seems to be going in the opposite direction, which
Yeah.
is a shame because really, if their grip was going along with that, we might even see even better records, even like greater amounts of weight lifted. Um, and I know you've done some pretty incredible stuff with a kettlebell. Like, tell us a little bit about that because I don't want to ruin it for the audience. I remember I've
Now,
seen some videos from ages ago that are like mind-boggling.
the kettlebell is kind of an interesting story for me because here again, I was kind of a fan of the old time strongman.
Mhm.
Because I knew who Pavel was. I'm friends with him now, but the very first kettlebell I ever owned, it was 153 pounds with a thick handle.
Wow.
The guy by the name of Dave Belomo up in, I think, Williamsport, Pennsylvania. He gave me that as a gift. So I started actually be able to actually juggle that, like flip it with the handles and stuff. So the very first kettlebell I ever owned was 153.
Wow.
The second one I owned, I think, was 105 pounds that they gave me from Dragon Door.
Mhm.
And then I got down, so I started at that top. So once I got down to the 53 pounders, it felt like nothing.
Of course. Of course.
Yeah,
Back then, I think you did the what was it? The Secret Service snatch test, but you did like 300 reps in 10 minutes.
yeah. I called Pavel up on the phone. I think most people, like the better guys, were getting around 200. Don't quote me exactly, but what I remember,
Yeah.
they were getting around maybe 200, 202, and I think maybe the record was maybe 240.
Yeah.
I said, Pavel knew me pretty well, but he knew all I did was juggle kettlebells. I didn't know how to clean one, I didn't know how to snatch one properly. And I
Mhm.
said, Pavel, do you think it would be any way someone could do over 300 reps on that Secret Service snatch test? And he goes, John, I think with your conditioning, you might be able to do it. And so he sent me a 53 pounder. And I remember I did it on the 8th time. Uh,
Wow.
the first 6 or 7 times I remember it was like in August, it was brutally hot and I was doing it outside, right? And
Right.
I was getting like in the high 200s, maybe 270, 280. But I remember just extremely hot. And I remember I went down to Orlando on vacation, like in this Marriott, and
Mhm.
I took it in this air conditioned gym and I got 302 that time.
That's
Just because I
amazing.
didn't, because I had a little bit more, I didn't heat up quite as fast.
Of course, yeah. You like there's something that happens with the kettlebell. For anybody who's never trained with one outside when it's like really hot and humid, like if you're in a nice cool area, there's like some level of like that coolness when you bring the kettlebell outside too. It's like condensation will form on it because of like the temperature difference, and so that also makes it hard to grip it. You got to have more
Yeah.
chalk and
And then Steve Cotter and a couple other people were telling me they watched me do it later. And they said, good gosh, because they're used to pulling it forward like a lawnmower, right?
yeah,
He said, I'm actually swinging it more, like this.
yeah,
They
like
said,
directly out in
you're
front of you.
traveling twice the distance you need to, and you still got over 300. They said, if you would pull it direct, I mean, no telling how many I would have got.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's incredible no matter how you did it. I mean, I think it's even more impressive the fact that you did it with more of like a wider arc, because yeah, like you said, like it's going to take longer to get in that position, but that also just gives you an idea how tough that test was because there were a lot of people. 200 is like like the minimum, and they
Yeah.
were like you said, 240 was about the maximum most people were going to see from doing it.
And
Um,
the key is with that too, and I try to teach that to people, adults are adults. They don't, a lot of times they don't listen.
yeah.
But if we can teach our body how to relax under distress,
Mhm.
whether it's mental distress or anything, we don't want to use any more adrenaline than we have to.
Mhm.
I remember, Gray Cook from the FMS. I don't think Gray would mind me telling you this, but he told me one time, he said he said I was the grand master at using enough energy to accomplish a task without using too much.
Yeah.
So I try to stay relaxed under that distress where I didn't get too my body didn't get too heated or too wound up.
That's cool. I like that. It's a very intelligent approach. And I like that you continually refer back to like the old schoolers, the old timers, because I feel like things either worked or they didn't. And they were most interested not in what's cool, what's popular, but really what works. And I think it's very easy for people to lose sight of that now in their training. And it reminds me too, and this is on the complete, well, I guess it's endurance oriented. So it may be along the same lines. There was a guy named Cliff Young in Australia. I don't know if you've ever heard about him, but he ran. I mean, he would sometimes he could run like for 5 days straight, meaning with no sleep, no anything. And they found out later on when they tested his gait as he ran, that his sort of weird shuffle that he did, which the other endurance runners weren't doing, was actually the most biomechanically efficient
Oh,
way
yeah.
to
Yeah.
run for a long period of time. And it's one of those things where he didn't need a degree or any special studies to do. He just tested things out, found what worked, and reap the rewards.
And most of those old time records, like you said, now all the weightlifting records, the powerlifting records always get beaten,
Mm-hmm.
and they will continue to, I'm sure. But if you look back at more of those old time strongman type records, still many of them have not been beaten.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot of people trying to do it. I mean, there's a lot of people, and some of them have still not been beaten.
Yeah, but give us some examples. One that comes to mind, and I don't know if it's been beaten or not, but like pressing the inch dumbbell, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been beaten?
Like the old bent press. Remember the old bent press? Like I think Arthur
Sure.
Saxon. Don't quote me exactly. I think he did 365. I think at a body weight of 200.
Yeah.
And they used to say the bent press was probably the most functional movement for your entire body. Of course, similar to the windmill, but different.
Sure.
But probably the most functional movement as far as pure strength and athleticism there was.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, there are a lot of those feats that may never get replicated. I know Paul Anderson had a back lift of like 6,000 pounds or more than 6,000 pounds.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think part of it, and I'd be curious to get your insights on it because you're a little bit closer. You've had probably more discussions with a lot of these people who are closer to training these old time methods. But I think part of it is that people now kind of want to try to compartmentalize their training as, well, I'm a kettlebell guy, or I'm a barbell guy, or I'm a power lifter guy. So they don't do as many different things.
Exactly. And then like one time I remember a guy, just kind of a big farmer type of guy, and he was lifting stones out of his field, and I mean, super, super strong guy, but I'm sure he didn't know what a bench press or like a deadlift even was, and I was kind of picking on the guy, and I said, Ken, why did you lift that big stone there out of your field? He said, because I had to, in other words, he was going to run over with the tractor or something like that. So
Right.
It was just kind of a natural way of life. They didn't really think anything about it.
Isn't that interesting?
Another thing too, not to get off on a tangent, but if people now will just keep trying to lift something until they hurt themselves.
Right.
If you look at anything in the animal kingdom, let's say an elephant or an ant, right? You can actually study an ant. They'll try to move something maybe once or twice. If they can't move it or manipulate, they'll move on.
Yeah.
They're not going to hurt themselves trying to do it. They may try to change the angle, but they'll move on. They won't continue trying to do it if they can't move it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that with the rise of ego lifting or training exclusively for records, it's led to this sort of lifting culture where you're willing to risk your health for the sake of a little bit of vanity. So you can say, oh, I lifted this, I did that. Sure, I hurt my knee or I hurt my back or I hurt whatever, but I got the record. But that gets old very quickly.
Oh yeah. They're like the old battle scars, and then they might kind of enjoy that glory for maybe a week or two, but then about 20 years down the road, when that injury still hurts, it's not so funny though.
Exactly. Now, you haven't gotten too many injuries in your training. You're very cautious.
I had one injury that turned into a huge blessing, and I'll make a long story short. Okay. And it wasn't really an injury, but while hiking, they said I pulled the insertion of my Achilles tendon on the left side, right? They said I pulled it, maybe tore it a little bit. So when I was done with the hike, I noticed I had kind of a bump there, a swollen area down at the bottom of the insertion. I never really felt myself do it though, right? But long story short, I struggled with it because it kept getting bigger and bigger, and then it turned into like a huge bone spur or calcification on the back of my heel, right? So very, very frustrating. But how it turned into a blessing, Alex?
How?
Actually, I was able to get out of shoes, and now I do all barefoot stuff or in a barefoot sandal. So God actually, he took me through that, which looks like a terrible defeat, but actually that was how I actually rehabbed my whole feet.
Incredible.
Just off that story. So very, very frustrating for about 5 years. I couldn't find a pair of shoes that would work. I kind of limped a little bit, just trying to get around. It didn't really stop me, but then, like I said, it's just now I do all barefoot stuff. I'll moccasin or like a, barefoot sandal. Turned into a huge blessing because people try to alter the foot all the time. I mean, God didn't make a mistake with the foot.
For sure.
If he wanted your heel jacked up like this, like most shoes, he would have put a lot more bone on the bottom of your foot. Right on the backside.
Yeah.
People say you can't build up your arches. You can build up your arches. I've done it twice. One time I was working on a DOT contract. I had to wear these steel-toed boots. So my arches fell because I was wearing the Herman Munster shoes. But
Sure.
your arches will actually build up quite quickly because that's how God created you to do.
Now it's one thing that I really like that where we keep coming back to is this sort of like returning back to the more natural approach to training, and you've built up an incredible amount of strength, resilience, and stamina. And again, and it's not from going into a really sterile gym with like perfectly calibrated instruments and stuff like that. It's from really moving the way that the body was made, and you have a very unique approach to how you refer to it, and you refer to it as renewing your youth God's way, renewing your fitness God's way. Maybe I'm misstating it, but I want to know more about this philosophy because it sounds like it's worked very well for you. Most people who get a heel spur do, what you started off doing, but they do it forever. They limp around, they have a hard time finding shoes, and then they never get better. But your approach has helped you to rejuvenate yourself, and I'm very curious to learn more about this.
Well, let me share this with you. So, and I'm certainly not throwing stones against the medical field. Please don't get me wrong. I was in orthopedics. I was in orthopedics for 10 years. Mm-hmm. But the typical thing people is going to try to do, whether it be a spur or something, they're going to try to put you in an arch support, right? So think about that. What is the arch? What is an arch support? It supports the arch, right? So basically, the arch doesn't have to work, so it gets weaker. Mm-hmm. It's like if me and you went out to a construction site and there was 20 people out there working. We're going to probably watch them work. We're not going to do anything, but just me and you, we're going to have to work. So when that arch is supporting that, the arch supporting the arch, your foot gets weaker. It collapses. But if there's no arch supported, it's going to build itself back up. And your feet and your breathing, I'll get to the breathing in a minute if I may, but your feet there's more nerves on the bottom of your feet than anything else in the body. A lot of people don't know that. So your nerves will actually, a lot of strength coaches saying, let's build up your glutes and your hips and stuff, which is very, very good. Don't get me wrong. But the foot has to come first, because once you implement the feet and those the nerves on the bottom of your feet will tell your hips and your glute how much to fire, when to fire, and not fire too much. Mm-hmm. So they're like a control panel that tells everything else what to do. Because when I had that foot problem, my pelvis would get out of line, right? No matter how strong I could get my glutes and hips, I still was struggling a little bit. Mm-hmm. But when I started putting my feet first, it's almost like my feet and my glutes shook hands and say, okay, let's work together. So your feet are very, very important for longevity as far as just pure strength as well.
I couldn't agree more. I think that is a very, very overlooked thing, because you see this a lot. There are people who they're constantly in shoes no matter what. And they, even if they like to be physically active, almost certainly at some point or another, they're going to come up with some sort of like an ankle issue or a knee or a hip issue. And a lot of it just comes from the fact that they're always, it's like they're padding the most important sensory input that they could possibly get. I've found that I've maintained very healthy lower limbs pretty much, for as long as I can remember, barring, like the odd injury that happens kind of like suddenly. And I think a big part of it has to do with the fact that I've always aimed for minimalist shoes or just no shoes when I can get away with it. And now you mentioned too that you were able to, just by wearing moccasins or barefoot sandals, that sort of a thing, kind of turn things back around. How long did it take when you started to do that before you started noticing?
Interesting. I actually wrote about that in my book, Renew Your Youth God's Way. But there's also a product called Correct Toes that a friend of mine, podiatrist Ray McClanahan, created, called Correct Toes. Because a lot of times, Alex, when people have that wearing the shoes all the time, not always, but a lot of times they have those really crammed toes too.
Yeah.
And so the Correct Toes spreads your toes. And what I found, actually, your toes want to go back to that natural splay. Mm-hmm. I mean, that they actually will over time with those Correct Toes. But it's a slow process building up the feet. I got to be honest.
Sure.
It probably took me to completely from terrible feet to basically world-class or almost the national athlete. It probably took me 2 years, but I could see the results little by little. So I would go out, and now I can run barefoot. I don't run on concrete, but I would go out and maybe, I wanted to be able to walk 100 miles, not straight. I wanted to be able to walk 100 miles barefoot before I tried to run 100 yards barefoot.
Smart. Very
so
smart.
It's kind of a slow process, so I didn't want to have any callbacks, but the feet will actually go back and rehab themselves pretty quickly, but you just have to be patient.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot, honestly, of like the approach that original strength takes, where it's like if you move the way that you're supposed to move, your body will move the way that it's capable of moving.
Yeah.
And the more we get away from that, that's where the problems start to crop up, because our bodies are just going to kind of react to the input that we give it. So we can give it good input that is going to lead to better output or better result, or we can give it input that's not so good, and then we have to deal with those consequences no matter what. And I know, you've known Tim Anderson for ages and ages,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
Tim's been a guest on the show a couple of times. I've been a guest on the Original Strength podcast, but I don't think a lot of people know the story about how you and Tim met and the influence you guys have both had on each other's lives and training and that sort of a thing. So I think I know a bit of the story, but I want to hear from your perspective how you met Tim, how you guys started training together, and all that other good stuff.
I live in Pinehurst, North Carolina, and he lives up in Fuquay, Meridian, which is outside of Raleigh.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to do a lot of private trainings or small group trainings here at the house, basically for the battling ropes. And there was 2 or 3 people, they were coming, and I was trying to pick up a couple more. And I think I saw Tim. He was a fireman, but he's also like a level 2 RKC.
Mm-hmm.
I called him out of the blue. Hey, I'm such and such. We actually only live an hour away. And he came down to the course, and we became very, very good friends then. Mm-hmm. And then as far as the original strength, and I'm sure Tim wouldn't mind me telling you this, but I seek God when I created the battling rope system. Mm-hmm. I prayed and asked the Lord, would you reveal to me the best way to train to sustain physically and mentally? Okay. Mm-hmm. But basically, I shared that with Tim. Tim did the same thing. He seeked God on the original strength movement, and God revealed that to him.
And what's very interesting too, is that it always goes back to just moving the way that we're made. Do the stuff that you're designed to do. It's not, and then lo and behold, we created some sort of like a crazy machine doodad to whatever. It's like how to use your body in the real world to build up the kind of strength and resilience and power that you really want. And I know that as I recall, I think Tim mentioned that you talked about he was a level 2 and you were interested in like his kettlebell insights. Because I think at the time, I think he said he was ranked as the number 1 in the world because he got a bunch of his clients to write or to rank him basically, like testimonials, something to that effect. I mean, I think he mentioned this on a podcast of mine. And then, and he talks about connecting with you and doing some of your routines. Now, were you doing battling ropes even back then when you met Tim, or was this something that came up later?
Oh no, I was doing the courses, the certifications way before I met Tim. Cool. And that's what I called him about. He wanted to learn the battling ropes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't remember how many years ago. I created the battling ropes about 16 years ago. So I'm guessing it might have been 14 years ago. Mm-hmm. But no, we hit it off quite quickly, like I said. But when you use your body, the way the body, God created your body, it will work well, but also it will rehab itself because your body wants to go back to that. And not to change the subject, Alex, one very, very important thing for your listeners is when you go barefoot again, it starts to lengthen your Achilles tendon.
Oh, very nice.
Stretch it. Now you don't want to try to do that all at once because you're gonna have a nightmare. You know what I mean? Yeah. But basically by going barefoot, what it does is it lightly stretches and lengthens your Achilles tendon, which is a gold mine.
Yeah.
That's why when you go barefoot, kind of ease into it, don't overdo it. But since then, I mean, it's almost impossible to get plantar fasciitis or Achilles tendon injury if you do all barefoot stuff, as long as you start slow.
That makes sense because in addition to the fact that, when you got your barefoot picking up all the sensory information from the ground up, you've got you've got a better foot position. You're not artificially shortening your calves constantly by having the heel elevated all the time. It only makes sense that this stuff altogether is going to help that whole complex to work quite a bit better. And I would imagine then that it's probably you find something similar with the hands, because with battling ropes, obviously, you're gripping it directly. You're not wearing gloves or anything like that.
Yeah. If you're doing like the explosive power, like the tsunamis and stuff with the battling ropes, you're actually you're building your hand strength as well. Mm-hmm. Because when you're doing the real heavy stuff, when you're slamming something down, the more force you put on that rope, the harder it's going to try to rip it out of your hands, right? Mm-hmm. So basically, you're actually building your grip the same way.
Very cool.
And the harder you can hang on to that rope, the more force your body can put into it. Mm-hmm. It's back to that same thing with the vice,
Yeah. You and you
Trying to bend something in a vise or trying to do a deadlift with a spider web wrapped around the bottom of the bar.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to work out in your favor. That's
Doesn't
for
work
sure.
real well with a spider web at the very bottom you're trying to pull up on. No.
No, I would imagine. Now, I feel like I've seen videos in the past. I know you have trained some professional athletes, even in your battling rope system. Who are some of those folks, if you don't mind mentioning them? Because some of them, I'm drawing a blank. I remember having seen some pictures from your website from many
Well,
years ago.
just to kind of simplify, I won't mention personal names, but just pretty much the NFL teams. I started with the Cincinnati Bengals, Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Oh, cool.
So I would go down to a place like that, and the Patriots, and I would actually go to their facility. The Bengals were my first ones, by the way. So
Nice.
I would go there to the facility all day long or 2 days and just work with all the players.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And did they pick up on it quickly? They really liked the battling ropes?
Yeah, it was frustrating. And then in the military Olympic wrestling team, they did because it frustrated them.
Yeah.
It's because they looked at it, even to the trained eye, they're thinking, it doesn't make sense. It can't be hard. You got this, 25-pound rope.
Right.
They can squat 800 pounds, right? And all this. And all of a sudden they were getting taken out like in a matter of 20 or 30 seconds by this little rope.
It's got to sting a little bit to the ego, especially if you're so used to being so physically dominant. I think in most people's cases, and particularly high level performers like that, they got to be like, well, no, I have to master this. There's no way I can just let this slide. I've got to crush this.
I did not find one human being, and I won't mention names, but I mean, I'm sure they wouldn't mind, but I'm not going to do it just out of professionalism. But
Sure.
I did not find one human being in anything. I mean, whether it be football, UFC, or anything that could physically sustain a minute with the ropes, hard and fast.
Mm-hmm.
There'd be some that would kind of gut it out a little bit, but they weren't really having it. I didn't find one person until I showed them how to train that they could sustain a hard minute with that.
Yeah.
Once you follow the formula, you can actually sustain that over long periods of time, faster and faster, and it'll actually go to any sport or any activity you do.
Impressive. And what would be a good, we were talking about battling ropes specifically, what would be like a good challenge to shoot for in terms of like sustained hard effort with the ropes?
Most people have a tendency to put it in circuits, rounds, and intervals. Mm-hmm. And adults are adults, right? Now, I think circuits, rounds, and intervals are good. Don't get me wrong. It does burn fat. We know that, and it's motivating. But here's the problem with circuits, rounds, and intervals all the time. Okay. And we'll make this very, very simple. I like to write everything in real life. So if you're doing circuits, let's say we're going to do 40 seconds of kettlebell swings, 40 seconds of box jumps, 40 seconds of push-ups, right? But it doesn't matter. I'm just using those for example. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're doing your 40 seconds of kettlebell swings. Before it really starts to work physically and mentally on your mind, what do you get to do? You get to quit and go to something else.
Yeah.
And then, so now you're doing your push-ups. Before it really starts to work on you mentally, you get to quit and go to something else. So you're not really training your mind to sustain under difficulty. And also you're not really building up that, with the old time term, the lactic acid threshold.
Sure.
But in real life, we got to be able to sustain. If we get up Monday morning and go to work, we got a headache, we're still expected to go to work and work that 8 or 10 hours.
Yeah.
Just like we put our mind like a GPS in a car. Let's say you're going from Omaha, Nebraska to Tampa, Florida, right? Mm-hmm. Your GPS doesn't care if there's snow, rain, or construction work. Its goal is to get you to Tampa, right? So we need to set our mind the same way. Not look at the difficulty of the problems, just build a sustain and get ourselves there. We don't know if it's going to be hard or easy, but we're going to get there. So I tend to let's say I'm going to work out for an hour. I like to use the same drill the entire hour.
Wow.
Not something that's going to hurt you, but the same. And the reason I do that, it builds up my lactic acid threshold. And I'm able to sustain that endurance. And also it's a little bit boring at times.
Yeah.
So if I can teach my mind how to work through that boredom too, it's going to help me with everything in real life. Does that make sense? It
makes perfect sense. I feel like that's actually, that's something that a lot of people try to avoid. Like people don't like being bored, but I think that it's very important to know how to confront boredom and not try to shuffle it to the side by, checking your social media accounts and stuff like that. You have to have the ability to endure stuff like this because there are going to be times when you're bored, you'd rather be doing something else, but you really need to get a project done. And it's good to see that there is an approach to fitness that can actually prepare you for that. Because theoretically, fitness should be something that has a carryover into the real world. Yeah. But more and more that we compartmentalize it into being, this is just what I do in the gym. And then they get out into the real world and they're really not much better off. They're not a whole lot better off, for all of the sweating and the grunting and all the other difficulties they face in the gym, this sounds like this is something that can actually mentally and physically carry over into the real
We'll teach
life.
you how to sustain. We don't get on the job site, and say 4 hours, yeah, man, I'm bored, I'm going home.
Yeah.
Or people are married or have a girlfriend and getting one little spat and they think, oh man, I'm gonna throw in the towel. You know what I mean? We got to we got to be able to learn and sustain over time and relax under that distress. I've had a lot of people come to me, and I won't mention names, but some of like the top CrossFitters and people, but lots of different types of people. I'm used to use, for example, they'll come and I'll teach them my training methods. They want to learn it. Anybody that's ever been here knows I don't push anybody at all. You know what I mean? You can go as hard as easy. I never will push you. I never will say anything derogatory. And most of them would say to me, gosh, John, why did I struggle so much with your training? Look what I did in my sport, in the Olympics or CrossFit. Why did I struggle so much with yours? And I told them why. I said, because all your training is really, really good. You're very strong and fit, but you're used to constantly changing before things really get hard. You get to go to something else. With mine, you didn't. You had to learn how to stay on task and work through the difficulty. And your mind nor body is used to doing that. And then it made perfect sense. They weren't insulted. It made perfect sense to them then.
Yeah,
that's how real life is. We got to be able to sustain whether it's a good day or a bad day.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of which, I happen to remember a few stories of some other feats that you've done that are kind of in the same vein, where you had to sustain a challenging effort for a long period of time. I think you dragged a semi, wasn't it? Or you walked with a semi for like a mile, dragging it behind you, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
10 or 12 times we pulled a mile. I did it with a partner, Kirk Nobles. 8 or 10 times I did it by myself a couple times. And I feel like that the truck pulling or maybe dragging like a plow or something in a field, I think, Alex, that's probably the greatest way to train your body, and also the greatest example of physical strength. And here's why. Okay, a lot of times people will say the squat is the greatest you know what I mean? I understand why they say this, but here's why I disagree. Okay, the most natural movement God ever gave us, what is it? It's walking, moving forward, right? So if I found a way basically to take moving forward, walking, and add that resistance to it, which would be dragging chains or pulling a truck. So that's why I like that motion so well, because it's so natural. Very, very difficult when you have a 40,000-pound tractor trailer behind you for a mile, and some of it's uphill. It's very, very hard, but it's also hard to get hurt though too, because if you're in shape, it's such a natural movement. You're very unlikely to get hurt, even because it's so natural, even though it's so difficult.
This is one of the things that I think is just excellent about this heavy gait pattern training in particular, is because it is so natural. It's like our body is made to walk and is able to do these other things that we like to do, like squat and deadlift and press and that sort of a thing. But it's easier to overdo it on some of the things that we are able to do, but it's harder to overdo it on the stuff that we're made to do. I think, to me, that sounds like what it comes down to.
Well, I'll use this for an example. If you let's just pick on Walmart, for example. Let's go and we're going to take 10 people out of Walmart, wherever you live, right? We're going to go take 5 women, 5 men out of Walmart, just randomly pick them, okay? And now we could put them on Olympic weightlifting. Every one of them's going to get hurt, right? Probably, if they're trying to do something. But I could hook every one of them up to like a heavy group of chains or a truck. Not one of them would get hurt. They wouldn't be able to do it, but they're not going to get hurt because they're in a very natural movement pattern.
Exactly. It's very well said. Very well said. And speaking of which, too, I know the walking is something you've been big on in terms of these challenges, like dragging a truck. But you've also, if I recall, some time back, you had it in mind to crawl a mile every day. Tim told me about this one.
Oh yeah, I almost forgot about that. Yeah.
I don't blame you. That sounds like the sort of thing you'd want to put out of your mind, because I've crawled 10 minutes straight a couple of times, and I was like, 10 minutes is good enough. Like I feel like I've gotten my fill. But for a whole mile, I mean, that's going to take about 60 minutes on average, right?
Yeah, I would take the workout, and here again, like we talked before, here's my workout for the day. I don't know if it's going to be terrible or easy, but you're going to crawl a mile for that day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or even sometimes I would drag that weight behind, because here again, you're dealing with a very, very hard motion, but very, very natural motion. Exactly. Then I think Tim did that official record crawling the mile.
Yep. Yeah, it's an incredible. If people who've never tried it, I think just try it for 5 minutes. You don't even have to try to go for the whole mile. Try it for 5 minutes without stopping at all. Just keep going, and you will understand the difficulty of doing this for a total of 60 minutes to get to a full mile. Now, this was like a mile, not necessarily nonstop, but like in total, right? Like you might pause periodically. And...
I did both. Most of the time I would do it back in my backyard. There's woods in my backyard. And I think I would usually go, there might be a runway up there 150 yards.
Mhm.
You know, I may go and then turn back around, you know, or maybe stand up just very briefly. Sometimes I would do it never without ever getting up.
Yeah.
And sometimes I might stand up like maybe for 5 seconds or something.
Right. Yeah, it's really incredible. And do you have any sort of tips or tactics that you have people do, and you have them do something similar? Like if they're going to do a sustained effort, like, you know, like some people, like runners will be like, okay, I'm just gonna focus on running to the next tree, and then after that I'm gonna run to that sign, and or do you tell them to like avoid all that and just like embrace the difficulty no matter what?
I just tell them to kind of just do it. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't. And you want to try to keep your head up the best you can, but it's most people keep their heads down,
Mhm.
which is actually not probably a bad idea where we were doing it, because there's a lot of, you know, potentially snakes and spiders there in the woods. But
Oh, sure, yeah.
now,
Sure.
one thing I've learned too, just on the subject, but off the subject, and I only started doing this about a year ago. It's very, very clear in the Bible and God's word that God breathed life into man's nostrils.
Mhm.
He said that many times. So I went to all nasal breathing.
Mhm.
I know there's a lot of different strategies with that. I certainly wouldn't argue with any human being on that, but I went to all nasal breathing. So let's say when I do my bicycling, um, now I can do it. Before it was hard. I never opened my mouth. I always strictly breathe through my nose.
Mhm.
And sometimes going up hills, I'll even do breath holds. There might be like a really big hill,
Mhm.
and then I'll do a breath hold for 30 or 40 seconds. But then when the breath hold's over, I don't open my mouth and gasp. I still stay with the nasal breathing. So I've been doing that for about a year now. But it's amazing how that, I won't get off on too much of a tangent, but just there's a reason God said that. He could have said, I breathe life into man, but he said, I breathe life into man's nostrils for a reason.
Yeah.
Because when you do the nasal breathing, and also, as you well know, it pulls your diaphragm up, right? So by pulling your diaphragm up, it also lengthens your spine, creates more room in your discs. So
Mhm.
you're helping your entire spine, puts more oxygenation
Mhm.
right into the cell. You know what I mean? So basically, it helps your entire body. It's anti-cancer. So with the nasal breathing, I mean, so many things are going on there you don't even think about. Plus, it will enhance your flexibility, as you well know.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I can say for sure, you know, I like the all nasal breathing approach. I remember, you know, I had to recertify my level 2 kettlebell skills last year, and one of the things, and I think I've done this a few times now, but I was especially religious about it this time around, is that, for instance, doing any sort of kettlebell ballistic work, I would only breathe in and out through the nose.
Mhm.
During the test, I would breathe out through the mouth. But my rationale was, well, if I can do it all through the nose with a more like difficult approach, maybe like heavier weights, more explosive type of training, and including in the rest periods, um, then it'll be really easy when I have to breathe out through the mouth, because it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's like cheating. It's certainly not. There's a value to breathing out through the mouth. But yeah, the whole experience felt much easier once you take the slightly more the route with a little bit more resistance, which is breathing in and out through the nose only. It makes a huge difference.
And I'll say this too, this is very, very important. Okay. Most people don't think about this because, you know, stress is about the biggest killer of people. You
Oh
know
yeah.
what I mean? Just that stress factor. So I won't try to get scientifically here, but when you breathe through your nose, you know, your nervous system is telling the rest of your body everything's okay.
Yeah.
You know, so basically it keeps you out of that fight or flight as well. Now, one of the hardest things to do with breathing through your nose is crawling. Or
Mm.
like when you're down, like in those positions like that. I can do it, but that's probably the hardest position, like down, like ground crawling, or doing something where your head is lower than your feet.
Mhm.
You can do it, but that's one of the harder ways to do it.
I have to agree. I definitely think that. I think particularly because your midsection is working so much harder as well
Yeah.
to kind of help you to stabilize. You don't get as much expansion of the waist, so it's hard to get in like a nice full deep breath. They're just necessarily a little bit shorter. Yeah, that's very much the case. Absolutely. Um, Now, we've talked quite a bit about a lot of these very cool approaches to restorative training, and we talked also a little bit about uh, making your body move the way that it's supposed to move so that you can do the things that you want to do. And I think, for instance, a grip training is a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. And like I said, I mean, I know given the fact that you're such an expert at it, one of the things that would be cool is if we could showcase some of the sculptures that you have made with your bare hands by
Appreciate that.
bending steel and other things like that. And now, YouTube viewers are going to be able to see this pretty easily. And if you are listening on like Spotify or iTunes or some other platform, I'm going to include a link in the description so that you can go and see this in YouTube as well. I've got it kind of rigged up into a document. John sent me, it was nice enough to send over a bunch of cool pictures of sculptures that he's made, but bending them again with his bare hands, not with a vise and all these other implements. So I'm going to do a quick screen share here, and I'd love it if you could walk us through some of the stuff that you have made, because
Okay.
it's really pretty remarkable. So we've got this one here. There might be a better picture. Let me see if I can. Well, and we'll go back up just a second. This one I think is a little
Yeah.
bit clearer.
Got a real clean garage there, by the way, too. You see the rings and the ropes and stuff in there.
I do. And by the way, I want to point this out too, folks. John is one of the strongest men in the world, and even he has small kettlebells. So if you have small kettlebells, do not ignore them. They are very useful no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah, I see those little things on the side there. But so this is actually what I call an iron bonsai tree.
Mhm.
It's the only one I ever tried to paint green, but that's actually 20 foot of steel there.
Now, how did you manage to do that? Because it almost doesn't look possible.
I started, it is quite difficult because I have a 20 foot stick. I start at one end and start twisting with my hands, and don't quote me exactly, but I think, I didn't count them, Alex, exactly, but I think there's about 80 some bends in that particular little bonsai tree.
Wow.
It's very, very tight in there. And like I said, usually I keep them natural black. I was fiddling around, I just tried to paint that one green.
Mhm.
But you got about 20 foot of steel there, 80 some bends. So even though you have a 20 foot stick of steel, I'm bending something probably 4 inches at a time to be able to get it like that.
Right. That's
And
incredible.
if you don't like it from that angle, you can turn it from another one. You'll never recognize it, because I can't, every piece of steel or every sculpture I do, they cannot be duplicated. They're all one of a kind. I could try that a million times and not come out with that same design.
Yeah, it's incredibly intricate, and I like that you called it the iron bonsai tree, because it's exactly what it looks like, and it looks like you've welded it or connected it in some way to this base as well.
I prune this one just a little bit once a week, and I water it every 2 weeks, just a little bit. But other than that, it kind of takes care of itself.
Yeah, it looks very low maintenance for the most part. The highest maintenance part had to have been actually bending it and creating it. After that, the watering and the sunlight, that part must be pretty easy. So
Well, sometimes I'll start bending one too, and I'm thinking, I don't really like how this is going. Then by the end, it's like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. That's kind of the artist in me, I guess.
You got to see it through to the end. It can't just be the sort of a thing that you try out and then you stop. Like you said, you got to be sustained. It's got to be something that you keep after. Now we got this one cool. There might be we got a more close-up image of this one. This one looks very cool because it looks a little bit more, let's say, organized, a little bit better ordered. And again, it looks impossible to have done with the bare hands, yet you did.
Yeah, I actually just did that just recently for a friend of mine. It's about if I'm standing, it's about knee high, so it's pretty good size. I don't know how much it weighs. It probably weighs a good 50 pounds, but it's about knee height. I think there was 17 foot of steel, I think there.
Wow. Now, where do you find all this steel? You go to like a hardware store, you have to order?
I got a friend that's got kind of like a welding, kind of an old time hardware store, and sticks of steel, if you're not used to it, they generally come in a 20-foot stick off the tractor trailer.
Gotcha. And do you ever wear like gloves or anything like that when you're bending the stuff, or just bare hands?
I use like just a kind of old shop cloth, like a mechanic's rag, or like an old frayed washcloth. Usually something like that. No gloves, no gloves.
Sure. Yeah, very, very cool here. And do you have a name for this one? The other one was an iron bonsai.
Honestly, you called me. I don't have a name for this one. I apologize.
Okay.
Some of them I do. I didn't name this one though, but I made it for a friend of mine.
Yeah. If anybody has any suggestions for a name, you're welcome to share them with us. Okay, so we've got these two. Let's see. Now this one, very simple, but this one looks almost harder than the others, because if you ever...
This was the hardest bend I probably ever... Well, there's two of them, I'm sure. This is about the hardest bend I ever did.
I imagine. I'd love to hear more about this one.
It was a little bit longer, so not much, but I cut the very ends off to get on that plaque. That was actually a cold roll piece of steel. It's a 1/2 inch thick. And once in a while, I'll actually chrome them. Most of the time I leave them natural, but I actually, this was actually chromed almost like you chrome like a Harley Davidson or something. Very, very, very hard bend. That was almost, that one meant a lot to me, even though it's kind of simple and short. Very, very interesting.
Now, like I said, the simplicity of it belies what's obviously a very challenging bend, because like anybody who's ever held something like that knows that it feels like it can't be moved. Like at the 20-foot ones that you were talking about, you can bend them a little bit. Like bending them and keeping them in that position is a different story. But these feel like they don't want to bend at all.
Yeah, it takes a lot of strength to bend that thing, to be honest with you.
Oh, I believe it.
That was probably about, now the last couple you showed were brand new.
Yeah.
This was probably, Alex, I'm thinking maybe 10 years old.
Okay.
Yeah, I did that one a while back. Yes, sir.
Yes, you've been doing this for quite some time. Yeah, I like the elegance of it too. It doesn't look like it has any sharp kinks in it. Everything is like very smooth. It flows very well. So this is very cool.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at, we got the iron bonsai again. Okay, now this one here, this one's very interesting because it almost looks like a series of like musical notes, like a treble clef, I think they call it.
That one's about 17 foot of steel. And some of the bonsais I put actually in a stone. That's actually drilled down into a natural stone.
Wow.
The kind of the stain on their base, I was trying to put the glue on it, and that's what that stain is. But about 17 foot of steel. That was a hard one to bend too.
I would imagine, because just from the side, it looks very thick.
It's very, very thick. I don't remember how thick. It's very, very thick piece of steel.
Yeah.
Pretty heavy bending. I prune that one and water that one once in a while.
Oh, smart. Very smart. Yeah, you don't want it going from 17 feet to like 18 to 20. And then
if you leave it for a while, it'll go right through the roof there if you're not watching it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm sure that your wife would not appreciate it if all of a sudden there's a huge hole in the roof because you didn't water the plant properly, you didn't trim it. Is this one? Did we look at this one earlier? This is just
that was the original one, I think. Yeah.
The original one. Okay, cool. And now this one right here, you called this one the Cobra, if I recall correctly.
I made a little Cobra. It's actually a spoon. I actually just bent like a spoon, coiled it up 4 or 5 times there, and kind of set it up like a Cobra getting ready to strike.
Now, I think we've all bent a piece of silverware either by accident or on purpose, but not with this kind of intention. Because if you look closely, there's like a really tight curl, and it moves outward. It's almost kind of like a roller coaster in a sense, with like the multiple loops and that sort of a thing. And how are you able to get such a tight curl in there without breaking?
But I think I gnarled out like 4 times, just super, super tight.
Yeah.
And I had to be able to do it obviously where it stands up and balances. So it's a lot of the bends that I do, or some of them are really, really hard. Some of them are not so hard, but there's the artist in me as well. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to do something a lot of times when I'm actually bending it.
Very cool. Yeah, I like that one. Again, it's simple, but definitely very eye-catching. And this one in particular. This is
called a Samson's harp. That's actually in my courtyard here. That's actually 20 foot of steel. It weighs about 150 pounds.
Wow.
I call that I make Samson's harps small and large, but that's like a full body bend there. That's hand strength comes into play, but that's like that's a full body strength bend there.
Now, how long did it take you to bend all this?
Well, I honestly can't remember, because sometimes what I'll do, I kind of have a thought in mind, like with that green bonsai. I might have fiddled with that for a couple hours because I was kind of trying to do something with it. And then some of the other ones I'm not really trying to do. I just kind of bend it. That one I can probably bend in, 15 minutes. Interesting. Yeah, probably 15 minutes.
Yeah, to me, what I like about this one too is that it's all contained in one area, so it's like it's got like a level of simplicity to it. But then, like you said, it's 150 pounds. So you try to pick it up, and all of a sudden you realize just how mammoth the actual weight of it is. It's
quite large in real life. You can't really tell by the picture, but it's quite large. It's about waist high.
I was going to ask, because you mentioned one of them being about knee height. This one looks like it would have to be almost twice that high.
Yeah,
very impressive.
I'd say, yeah.
And then, this is just another angle.
This is the hardest piece of steel I've ever done. There's a park over here in Pinehurst that you can't see the plaque there, but it says Samson's harp, hand bent by John Brookfield of Pinehurst. This is another harp, but this is over 200 pounds of steel there.
Wow.
It's actually over there in the park in the courtyard where the mayor's office is. That was the hardest. Well, the one for hand bending, the chrome one. This is the hardest body bend I ever did in my life, the body bend. So when I bend that thing, I'll bend it down, and it's trying to come back on me so hard. I would almost like just almost throw you into space basically. So I push it down with my body, and then it's trying to come back. I mean, it'll just knock the crap out of you. Pardon my language. If you don't keep the force down on it, because it wants to spring back so hard.
I can imagine. I remember actually, I'm very familiar with Dave Whitley. I know he does a lot of bending.
Yeah.
I remember him telling a story once where I think he was trying to bend something, and he said it like bounced back and like hit him. And people don't realize that sometimes you've got metal like this that you're trying to bend, and you really have to fight with it in order to get that bend to stay there, because otherwise it just wants to bounce right back where it was supposed to be.
Oh, it can come back, and I think this one, Alex. Here again, I need to measure. I think that is actually about 8 inches wide, or 8 inches wide. That way, and I think it's a good 1/4 inch in diameter. So there's a lot of steel there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely looks like it. I think that about covers it from the ones that you've sent over. Really impressive stuff. I mean, again, anybody who's ever tried to bend something that was a little bit beyond their abilities knows that this sort of a thing is no easy feat. You've been doing this for many years. You've got a lot of and not just that. I know that you've torn phone books. I seem to remember seeing a video of you on Regis and Kathy Lee many years ago where you tore 59 decks of cards in like a minute. You've got quite a long history, just an unbelievable wealth of knowledge. So for the listeners who want to keep up with you, what would be the best way to find you, either online, like a website, or social media, that sort of a thing?
Well, I've got probably the easiest one. I've got johnbrookfield.com. And if anybody wants to personally contact me, I don't mind. Like if you're interested, I'm doing those sculptures now.
Yeah.
So if someone's interested in one of those sculptures, large or big, and want me to do one for them, my personal email is john@powerropes.com. And that's on my website as well, johnbrookfield.com, but john@powerropes.com.
Excellent. And folks, you'll be able to find that information in the show notes. I'm going to be putting that in the description, show notes, depending on where you're watching or listening this from. You'll be able to find it there. So john@powerropes or johnbrookfield.com, and they can get access to your wealth of knowledge. Anything you want to leave us with before we sign off officially?
Well, also not to promote, but I wrote that new book, Renew Your Youth God's Way. You can go on it. Yeah, Renew Your Youth God's Way. That's got all kinds of basically how to stay young and renew your health, but also how to retain your youth. And it's all biblical based too. Basically, there's a wealth of knowledge, beyond wealth of knowledge in the Bible, and that was actually researched there. So I would encourage people, you can get a lot out of that book.
Fantastic. And where can they find that book?
Probably the best place is just go on Amazon.
Right.
Yeah, just Renew Your Youth God's Way on Amazon is probably the easiest way to get it.
As an owner of a number of John's books, I can definitely tell you that you will not be disappointed. I think you will probably maybe smack your forehead multiple times at like the clarity with which you will be given ideas on how you can, like as John said, renew your youth God's way, improve your strength, your fitness, your health, and do so simply. There's nothing crazy or newfangled or anything like that. It's all very direct, very simple. Not necessarily easy, but certainly very simple to implement.
I appreciate that. Like I said, the two things I would suggest for longevity or even strength is to use your feet, rehab your feet properly, and go to all nasal breathing.
Very smart. I couldn't agree more. I think those are both. If you had to start with just two things, those would definitely be the things to do. That is excellent. Well, John, thank you very much for being on the show.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. And folks, as always, have fun and happy training.